don't really have to be a scientist. You don't have to get into the specifics of the numbers. You just need to tell the EPA, I support your regulations. I support improving the health of the St. Johns River, and I want you to hold firm to your beliefs that you, the EPA, believe this is what we need to do in this state to move forward.
And Neil, I have to make, if you're watching this show soon after it goes to air, it may not be on the site right away. We're still putting that fact sheet up on the site, but on the River Hugger blog, which you'll see that on the bottom of the screen, riverhugger.com.
Thank you.
We do have an entry there that shows you how you can contact the EPA if you're interested in submitting comments, and we encourage you to do so because they need to hear from you. As Neil mentioned, it's not that any of these are bad people that spoke yesterday.
Right.
It's just they have an agenda that is not in the best interest of the river. It's about their bottom lines and not about the St. Johns River. And a lot of these folks, frankly, are paid consultants and lawyers that were sent over there to represent somebody's financial interests. And so, but I mean, even when you talk about the financial interests, though, I think the future of our state, the health of our state, depends on clean and healthy water, especially a state that is a tourism-based economy. And this is an investment in the health of our of Florida and our future and our quality of life. And so I think that these arguments really ring hollow with a lot of citizens that we've heard, because people recognize that when they see their rivers turning green, they know there's a problem. They know this isn't right. They know that something needs to be done, and they want to do it. And I've equated it to like education. We wouldn't say just because our economy is hurting that we need to cut back on education and not invest in education. It's the same thing with our waterways. We really need to make an investment in the future of our waterways, and clean and healthy water, it's a good investment.
Right. Well, Jimmy, last night I spoke. You spoke early. There were 3 sessions. I think something that was I found really insulting is a special interest group. The EPA showed some of the photos from across the state, and it was powerful.
Photos of algal
blooms in the Withlacoochee River, the St. Johns River, and some of the springs, which I think all of us kind of imagine are these clear flowing bodies of water. We'll talk about in a few minutes. It's not that way. One of the special interest groups guys, rather than looking at this thinking we need to do something, he tried to argue that these photos were either outdated. The photos that were shown of the river this year, last summer, 2009, he claimed were photoshopped. That kind of just discussion gets us nowhere. And the point I made was, try telling the people in Jacksonville and St. Johns County that what they saw in their backyard was not a green mess, was not very distasteful, smelled terrible, and tell businesses that were harmed. Jimmy, the main thing, let's maybe end on this is, our job is to push for regulations like this. As I told the people last night, I'm not up here ashamed that we push this. We're here to say, welcome to the EPA. Please help us devise nutrient targets that we can shoot for, that will help us achieve a cleaner, healthier river system, and ultimately will provide us a clean, as you say, base for ecotourism and just recreation in general.
And I think I'm going to end on this actually, Neil, and had our state agency, the Department of Environmental Protection, done their job, that they've had 12 years to do, we wouldn't be having these hearings. And we'd actually be moving on towards getting, that's the frustrating thing too, is that
we could have been down the road.
We could have been working towards restoring the health of the river instead of having hearings discussing what needs to be done, because we already know what needs to be done and known it for a long time. Neil, you mentioned springs. I'm going to shift gears to that. Actually, yesterday in Tallahassee, it was really interesting. There was also a springs rally, which on one hand was very uplifting, and to see all those people holding signs in support of springs. But it was frankly, to me, it was discouraging, and it was sad, because when you hear the state of our springs, we are so blessed in Florida to have more springs than any other place on planet Earth. It is really one of the most unique and one of the most majestical things that, natural resources that we have. And yet, unfortunately, we are squandering this incredible natural resource. Neil, can you tell us a little bit about what we heard?
Well, the first thing I want people to recognize is, we're a big proponent of springs protection. Not only, as Jimmy said, they were one of the most magical natural features on Earth. A third of our river, a third of the St. Johns River, its flow comes from beneath the ground from the spring system. And what we heard, sadly, Jimmy, was the springs are polluted with the same issue we just got through talking about, nitrogen, in some cases phosphorus. Nitrogen is coming up from the aquifer at levels many people never thought we would see. All of us kind of think about Silver Springs, the great tourist attraction, and at one time,
and the largest spring on Earth.
At one time, yes, at one time it was. What has happened there is tragic. The nitrate, which is a nitrogen level, are up in the last, I think, 10 years, 200%. They're approaching levels in some cases that are, pushing the limits for drinking water. It has caused a shift in the system from the beautiful eelgrass that we see that drives those systems to something, the nitrogen is stimulating this really kind of ugly, unattractive algae. The fish species in Silver Springs has declined by 96%. When I was a kid, which is a long time ago, my family came to Silver Springs on a vacation. It was one of the most unbelievable treats I had had. I was probably 6 or 7 years old. We were in these glass-bottom boats. They played this game called catfish football where they threw bread out and the catfish, and none of those species are there. The fish are very reduced. And the saddest thing, Jimmy, Dr. Bob Knight, who is a scientist at Florida, announced at a meeting, at a river rally that was this past week, that the flow of Silver Springs has dropped 30%. It is no longer the biggest spring in Florida. And, all of this has happened.
He also said, it's interesting, Neil, he said that the amount of water that has declined from the flow is equal to a first magnitude spring.
Right.
Which is unbelievable. It's almost like we've lost an entire spring.
Right. And it's, sadly, Jimmy, yesterday there were people there holding signs, hopeful people holding signs, because many of the springs in this state have ceased to flow. White Springs, which was one of the most historic springs in the state, no longer flows. In fact, a speaker said now the hole in the ground, if there's a big rainfall, rain goes into the springs, but there is no flow coming out of the springs. Blue Springs, one of the areas where manatees overwinter, it's going down. It's a tragedy, but I think the thing that was so uplifting for us yesterday, there were probably close to 200 people. There were a lot of young people. What I thought was very hopeful was a series of young people had brought spring water from several springs to the rally, and they spoke eloquently about what the springs meant to their families and what hopefully it meant to them.
Yeah, it really, Neil, I think we all think of springs as being, like you mentioned, really pristine and really something that is so unique to Florida and such a treasure, and yet it shows you that even these really unique natural treasures, we're still polluting them, and we know we're doing it, and we continue to do it. And it was interesting, actually, John Moran, who's the very well-known wildlife photographer, he spoke, incredible speech, one of the best I've heard in a long time. And he spoke about the tragedy of the commons, which is this idea that was written about, back in I think it was the 1960s, that we will all, out of personal self-interest and gain, we will squander a resource knowing that in the long term will harm all of us. Yet we do it knowingly because we're looking out for our own short-term interests, and we continue to do that. And I think that's what this whole thing is about, whether it be the nutrient standards, the springs, or as we'll talk about in just a minute, our groundwater. It's about, we've got to start looking at what's in our collective best interest.
Right.
as a whole, and start looking long term and start planning for our future, for future generations. Because right now what we're doing is we're getting ready to hand the next generation, our kids, our grandkids, we're getting ready to hand them a